pray. We'll get started. So, Father, we thank you for this time we have on this today that you have given to us. Thank you for loving us, providing for us, and sustaining us. Thank you for all your love and peace and your grace that you give each and every day to us and our extended families. Continue to think of the needs that we have for the extended family, from Pam's father to Lenny's father to my mother, and to all the situations that you know about that are there trying us, and the physical needs that are there to be met by you as the healing physician, and but more importantly, the spiritual, just the peace and growth that's needed for not only the ones involved, but all the ones that are outwardly, and the siblings and the extended family. May everything be a testimony to drive our thoughts and hearts and our will unto you, to be submitted, to learn, to understand your purpose and your way behind each of the events in life, especially these that are trying times and traumatic and emotional, loss of a loved one, or going through the trials of sickness of a loved one. And so we thank also for Greg and Sandy, what they're going through as well, and continuing to be, there's an ongoing situation of guardianship and care. So we just ask continual blessings and provision being made, and understanding and wisdom to be given to know what to say and what to do and how to do it. And so, Father, we thank you for this lesson that we continue to learn about Elijah and Elisha and their typology, and what you have written on your pages of their book to allow us to see inside their lives, to see more and understand more about who you are and what you have us to understand about your word. So be our pastor, our counselor, our shepherd, our teacher in this time, and our bridegroom, our everything. Father, we ask that you just, again, give us to be equipped in our minds and hearts and thoughts in this time, subjected to you. We ask all these things in Jesus, Yeshua's name we pray. Amen. So today's lesson, again, will be on 2 Kings chapter 8. We have a visitor, by the way, for those online. If you don't know, online, there's people from Illinois. So, and there's also a person later on who listens from England, and there's some other folks, I can't remember, Nebraska. Lainey's in Nebraska. So she used to be Clearwater and then Atlanta sometimes, and now she's Nebraska. So we have quite a few people online that interact. So there's Todd, Pam, Vicky, Dave, Tracy, Sandy, Greg, Maryland, Oklahoma too. I'm with Oklahoma, Maryland, Laney, Nebraska, and then who else is? And then Jim's local, but he's not local. He's on the other side of Orlando, and then Sheila and Lionel out in England. So anyway, that's who's hearing, just so you know. So everybody who may see somebody online, if you're seeing the back of someone's head, that's who that is. Because sometimes they'll say, "Who's that?" Terry said it. So that's a friend of Nancy Harbour. So, all right. So today's lesson will be continuously on 2 Kings, and we go through this whole study. We're looking at the ongoing unfolding of what's going on with Elijah and Elisha. But we look at the stories and relevance to the practical what happened. Then we also looking at the spiritual impact of what it means to us. And so what we've seen already so far is we have seen and talked about how the last chapter was tied together with chapter 6. So 6 was a chapter that ended with some famine involved, and the two women agreed to eat their son, which is just, oh my gosh. And then from that, then the king, even himself, Jehoram, was like, this is disgusting. He ripped his clothes. He gets so angry he wants to kill Elisha. And then he sends his emissary out to go get him. And then his royal officer then takes Elisha's words as if they were just don't matter. They're flippant. And so he insults God and insults Elisha. Elisha gave us some good principles to us, and we saw about on Friday that basically in the time of trial and time of tribulation, that God could say, hey, look, it could end within one day. Because Elisha says, this time tomorrow, this will be over. And so it's a nice lesson to us to realize that we're going through our trial and tribulation. I talked about it on Friday, that you may or may not see the trial coming. Maybe. You may or may not know the gravity of the trial. But one thing you'll never know is how long it's going to last. You don't know that. So I'll give you credit to you. If you're a wise, discerning person, you may know that, oh, I see it coming. Okay, I can see that. Oh, well, I see the gravity. This is going to be a real deep challenge for me. Okay, I'll give you that too. But you're not going to know how long it's going to last. And the case in point to that is Job. He was our champion on this planet that God said it was his boy. And he had the most endearing 5 months of this hell on earth. He had no idea how long it was going to last. He even mentioned that to Elihu. Elihu mentioned that back to him. The difference between the future and the present is one day in time. And you keep talking about Job, what was and how wonderful it was to walk with God for those 20 years. And what's going to be in the future eternity, standing with him on the last day, though he slay you. But it's the now that you're thinking it's just awful, right? And he goes, well, yeah. He says, well, what if your moment of death comes now? Then your present becomes your future, and how are you going to feel about that facing God? And so that was already referenced to us with Job, but it's being brought to bear with Elisha's testimony to the people of Israel, who none of them, by the way, none of them as kings came to subject themselves to God. However, Jehoram does have this respect for God and Elisha, because, hey, I would too if he took out my dad and my brother. And my mom's already had a prophecy against her. She's going to die. It's a matter of time. And she's going to die later on in the next chapter over. So with this being said, we saw the lepers come to the gate, and there was 4 of them. That's Gehazi we talked about, because in chapter 5, he gets leprosy and he's left outside. He's going to be brought into view in chapter 8 here, but now what's brought into view is a little triptych going back. We talked also how it ended with the king coming by night, and always time you see the word night, it references an ignorance. That's why when Nicodemus came by night, he was ignorant of not understanding what Jesus was talking about being born from above, as it should say in the actual Greek language, not born again, just so you know. So the word anagenesia is not there. It's palingenesia in other verses, but in there it's just born from above. So palingenesia occurs in Titus, which means a new birth. Born again is in 2 Peter. But over in John, neither one of them appears. It's just born from above. It's a birth, but it's from where it's from, not a new birth or not a second birth. That's not what it says. But the translators do that. That's all right. So here, in this context, we saw as the chapter 7 ends, it ends really just dramatically with they have God's provision being given to them. As you remember, as they took off to go and the lepers at night just blindly went in faith to go see what God's going to bless them with. Had no idea, but they put it all at risk. And then they find all this, they find food and drink and gold and silver and raiment and donkeys and horses just vacated. And that spoke to the 2 things we talked about. God made the sound of the Egyptian and Hittite armies that they thought were going to come against them. They thought they were close enough and large enough, you too would not, pack up your car. And if you heard a tsunami coming, and you're not going to stop to pack up your car. You just no time. So you're just going to leave. It just speaks to the urgency of how big the army was and how proximity close it was. So they left. And so then we find out that as the food is there and Elisha's prophecy is come to pass in verse 16 and in 17 and in verse 20 of chapter 7, you find where it's trampled underfoot by the people. So it's just horrendous how this royal officer, who the king, by the way, in verse 17 it says, and when the king, it says, and the word of the Lord as he has spoke when the king came down to him. But in verse 17, the king did not come down to Elisha. That was his royal officer, but it's imputed to the king as if he's the one who said what the royal officer said, which is why later on he's about to have his demise at the hand of Jehu from God telling Jehu what to do unto him. So now that's the background so far. And so far, again, to remind you, Elisha's been doing already twice as many miracles as Elijah did, and he's already in the first part of his ministry. He hasn't even gotten to the halfway point yet, and he's already just got more than Elijah. What I wanted to also reference to you is there's 5 famines during the time of the divided kingdom. And I'll just kind of revise this. This is important to know because it brings scale to what's about to be introduced in chapter 8, because he says again in chapter 8, he starts off and says, then spoke Elisha unto the woman, whose son he had restored to life, saying, arise and go in thy household, and sojourn where you can sojourn, which means to dwell, abide. For the Lord Yahweh hath called for a famine, and it shall also come upon the land for 7 years. Okay. Well, the first famine we found was in Elijah when he did the 1 Kings 17. There was no rain from heaven, right? That one went on for a while. Then you have also, now that went on for 7 years. We talked about that went on for 3.5 years, and the Mount Carmel part of it, which typifies that first half of tribulation. And then we find here he says 7 years, but where are the other 2 famines I mentioned, right? There's 5 in total. One's later, it's kind of separated. It's under Zedekiah. That's way later. That's during the days where the Israel kingdom is already wiped off the map. So I'm not even going to pay attention to that one right now. It doesn't even have relevance to me in the study. It has relevance overall, but not in the study we're looking at with Elijah and Elisha. So Elijah's first famine was in 1 Kings 17. The second famine was under Elijah, but in the King James, you're not going to be able to see it. So I want to show it to you. And it's in 2 Kings chapter 4 and verse 38 when he says the word dearth, but the word dearth is the same word for famine. And so it says, and Elisha came again to Gilgal, and there was a famine in the land, which ironically was the famine that he spoke about right after he gave this widow her son, and then he was 7 years old, and then he died, and he brought him back to life. And the very first story after that, 2 Kings 4, was there was a famine. Really interesting. So when you get to this part here in chapter 8, he says there's a famine again. But in between there, the other famine happened when, if you remember, Ben-Hadad besieged Samaria, northern Israel's kingdom, and caused a famine. So Zedekiah's famine, by the way, was caused by Nebuchadnezzar. This famine here was caused by Ben-Hadad. King of Babylon caused this one. King of Syria caused this one. The other 3, 2 Kings 8:1, 2 Kings 4:38, and then 1 Kings 17, those were all by God. So it's not that God didn't do them all. But he did it all directly in these cases under Elijah and Elisha, except for those two where he used a foreign enemy king to do it by besieging the city. So what does that speak to? So you have, by the way, remember, there's a, when the horsemen come into the, remember, this whole thing about Elijah and Elisha is about the whole tribulation period in typology. So what kind of famine is there going to be in tribulation period? We know it's going to be a famine for the word of the Lord. This goes back to what we mentioned earlier. That's why there's 3 famines. Elijah was a lower, no offense to him, he's a great guy, but he was given 30 fruit yield. He was sown 60 at the end of his life, but did not get a chance to bring forth the fruit thereof. So we would reference that as old wine, the new wineskin. But he had old wineskin. God gave him a new wine, but he didn't get the new wineskin. I mean, the new wine in the new wineskin. He got the wineskin, the framework, but didn't get the understanding to be able to apply it. And so that's where Elisha comes in wanting the double portion from 30 to 60 fruit yield. And then he goes on after that as well to do 100. That's why his miracles are transcending. So Elijah, famine number 1 here, and then Elisha's famine number 2, and then you go to famine number 3 over here. 3, well, actually that's where Benadad did that. But the ones that God brought on the land are 3 separated from 1, because the 3 separated from 1 are God did this one directly, God did this one through the king of Syria, and then God did this one directly. The 3 that God did directly speak to the sporos, the sparma 1 and 2 seeds, which are Luke, Mark, and Matthew. There's a famine for the word of the Lord in all capacities. However, the other 2 famines that you see are going to be from God, coincidentally, using kings of 2 different foreign kingdoms, Babylon and Assyria respectively, but both of them caused the famine by the exact same thing, by besieging the city. Interesting. Both, by the way, have been used by God, and both kings, Nebuchadnezzar later was touched by God through Daniel to go, whoa, there is a God that is real. Benadad was earlier moved by that when Elisha, if you remember, had the soldiers come in, led them to the king, Jehoram, and he said, don't kill them. Have a feast with them and send them back. So Benadad's like, whoa, that's kind of odd. You didn't kill my folks. You should have I would have killed your folks, but he didn't kill them. So it really speaks to a lot of typology here in reference to the first 3 famines are the sporos, sparma, 1 and 2, the famine of the word of the Lord. The other 2 famines are speaking to the hidden besiegement that you're going to have from those who are going to be literally looking for food, and the reference to the tribulation period of the Sumerikoi people and the 100-fold fruit people, who are going to be the only 2 people on the planet who are going to be living by faith. That's it on the tribulation period, the second half. The second half is going to be intense, and this is what Elisha is talking about. And so when you go through this story, he then picks up with the woman. Remember, she was the one, if you go back into chapter 4, it's kind of been a while since we talked about it. Phil, in chapter 4, to remind you, she was the one from verse 10 who said, let's make him an upper chamber. She was the woman who was from Shunem, if you remember. She was a great woman, and it says that she wanted to make a bed and a table and a stool and a menorah in verse 10 of chapter 4 of 2 Kings. And so that's referencing that she understood the doctrinal ideas about these things. And so she was a great woman, meaning of stature. And so here's a person that as she gets into this chapter 8, she's being told that there's going to be a famine for 7 years. In verse 2 of chapter 8, it says, and the woman arose and did after the saying of the man of God, and she went with her household and sojourned in the land of the Philistines 7 years. If you remember, the son says, oh, my head hurts. Notice how it doesn't mention her husband at all, even though it says her household. Because her husband's alive, but remember, he was not predicated on being of the same spiritual value as she was. She was the one who wore the spiritual pants in that family. I'm just telling you. And so she was the one that, remember, when his head hurt, he just goes, go and see your mom. What? He doesn't even actually have a concern for this son, which is kind of crazy. And then when she says, I'm going to go see Elijah, he poo-poos that idea. Like, you don't even care to take, you're saying just kind of pawn it off to your mom, and then you're saying when your mom wants to go to the man of God, you're saying that's kind of crazy. It doesn't really exemplify man of God type of character traits, this husband. So when she's in this state where she says, hey, he comes by often, if you remember before this, and she says, oh, I'm going to make a bed, I'm going to make a table and a menorah. I'm going to do all these things because it represents, the menorah is the inheritance representation. The table is the marriage feast. The upper room, understanding the dual inheritance. The whole bed, understanding recompense, because the bed speaks to Job's, as you mentioned in Revelation, the bed of Sheol or Hades. So you're like, well, wait a minute, this woman is a very great woman. She understands a lot, but she's married to a man who obviously is not the same. It's not the same. But interesting enough, Elisha does not say, go just you and your son. He says your household, which always speaks to the question I get quite often about, well, what if somebody's married to somebody who was of different spiritual level than somebody else? Are they both going to be benefited by the one? Well, clearly the answer is yes. Because here, he didn't say, take you and your son and just leave your husband. He didn't say that. Take your household. Take your household, which is, because they were wealthy, there's no other children that we know of she had, but it does include, because she's wealthy, a great position status, her husband and her other servants in her home. Which also is why later on, you're going to find out she gets restored. There's this great land that she owned. But in verse 3, as we go through the story, and she goes, and it came to pass after 7 years. Now, she was in the Philistine area for 7 years. Let's go on. I'm going to show you on here. When I go pull this out. So on the map, it's important to note what actually practically happened. And as you're looking, so Elisha tells her, once you go from Samaria, and once you go down, she goes down to the Philistines. He didn't say go there. He said to her, he said, and it's so there's going to be a famine. So he said, sojourn wherever you can. The word sojourn means to abide. In other words, make your home wherever you can. He did not say, go to the Philistines. He didn't say that. But we all know the Philistines have a history, with this guy named Samson. They didn't do so well, with Delilah representing the fact that he went down to the valley, represented him having eyes or desiring the things of life that were not for the Israelites, and that led to his ultimate demise. But when you find her going down here, it's like, why did she go down here? So some people say, well, she went down there because it showed that she was wanting to go by a coastal city because the family wouldn't affect them as much by a coastal city. True, because you have a coastal city versus inland, but why not just go over here? Why not go, she could have gone here in Israel, but remember, it's all Israel. So to her defense, well, you have the Phoenicians up here, which is where Samaria, you don't want to go that way, but you want to go south. So it makes sense. I get it from a geographic standpoint, if you want to go with that argument. But typology-wise, what does it represent? Because we know with Samson going to the Philistines, it represented a compromise of one's character, a compromise of what was obedience to God versus what they call iniquity. So Scripture says iniquity is the word for twisting or perverting God's word. You twist it to fit your narrative. I believe personally, because we're dealing with a restoration about to be told to us, that when she went down here, it typified where she was at. It typified that she was not in a place of spiritually ascending in her faith. She was becoming stagnant, and then this led to her becoming, unfortunately, she backslid. However, we find that she's restored. So her story is a type of a earthy one, as we find in 1 Corinthians 15. I'm not sure if you've read this yet or read, Deborah. So there's different bodies, and to remind, for your benefit, I'll just reference some of this in the diaglot. So in 1 Corinthians 15, he does a whole rendition on the bodies, and to remember, he says, and on the bodies of the resurrection, 1 Corinthians 15, he says, all flesh, verse 39, is not the same flesh, but there is one indeed of men, and one another of flesh of cattle, and of birds, and of fishes. And there are heavenly bodies and earthly bodies, but the glory of the heavenly indeed is one, and the earthly another. There is one glory of the sun, another of the glory of the moon, another glory of the stars, and the stars differ from star in glory. And thus is the resurrection of the dead ones. It is sown in corruption, and is raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor, and raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, and raised in power. It is sown as an animal body, which means solical, and is raised in a spiritual body. Is there an animal body? Again, the word should be solical. That's what it says in the diaglot, the left side of the Greek language. And there is also a spiritual body. But he says this, and I'll stop here, a couple of 3 verses left. And so it has been written, the first Adam became a living soul. The last Adam is spirit, a life-giving spirit. The spiritual, however, was not the first, but the solical. Afterwards, the spiritual. The first man was from the ground, earthy. The second man is from heaven. And of verse 48, and of which kind of the earthy one, also the earthy ones. And of what kind of the heavenly one, so also the heavenly ones. And even as we bore the likeness of the earthy one, we should bear the likeness of the heavenly one also. So there's your reference to why I use that phrasing, earthy one. It speaks to her losing out on her entrance and inheritance. So you have to enter into the heavens first, then you inherit later as the bride. But she was actually in a position where she was given that information from Elisha earlier. She was of that status earlier, of a matured person, but she had backslid. And so now she's in a place where she's an earthy one. But it's okay, because Philistines represent a place where you're not supposed to be as a person of God, but she was there for 7 years. And it came to pass at the end of the 7 years that the woman returned out of the land of the Philistines, and she went forth to cry unto the king. And that means she's like, the word cry is in this phrasing of, she was bemoaning, she was appealing to him, she was beseeching him, like, in other words, rationalizing with him, like, this was my land, this was my home. I only left because of a famine. So she, and of course, God told me to through the man Elisha. So then, the prophet of God. So then the king, Watch how it just doesn't even talk about how Gehazi's there. It just, and the king talked with Gehazi. What? Why would Gehazi be there? I'll tell you why he's there. Because the previous chapter. Because Jehoram already knew that Gehazi and his lepers, 4 lepers, which were, by the way, 4 type of kingdom. Leprosy is a type of that which is interdisposition that's off with God. So if you have interdisposition that's off with God, because remember that goes, I'm talking probably a little fast here, but agathos is the word good in the Greek language, speaking to the good within us, which we do not have. Only God himself can be that in us. Kalos is the good that comes out of us, which represents we have the agathos good in us. So kalos not as in callous, kalos as in K-A-L-O-S. So the kalos good is the outward manifestation of the fruit of the Spirit of Christ. Agathos is the inner disposition of the Spirit of the Holy Spirit of God, who is already made our disposition one of repentance and confession and sanctification, reconciliation, so that we can produce that fruit. So if you don't have an agathos heart, you can't produce kalos fruit. It's impossible. So for her, in this state, what you have is, interesting enough, she's in this state where she actually was an agathos heart. We know that for how God touched her, when typology that is. But here we have her going to Philistines, and then the king goes right to Gehazi, because Gehazi is a leper who was touched by God, who then changes his mentality about walking by faith blindly into the darkness. Because remember, he left at twilight, and the lepers toward the Syrian camp, not even knowing they weren't going to be there. He had no idea. He was facing down death, literally. He looked at life over death and thought, either way, I win. So it's kind of a statement that Paul would make. If to me to die is gain, but to live for Christ is also gain. Either way, he's good. But here, he talks to Gehazi, which means Gehazi was already there as a part of his council, a part of what they would call the king's household. That's why he was right there. Gehazi was there. And Gehazi was already a changed man, which is why he then says all the good things. By the way, look what it says. Gehazi was there, and it says, the servant of the man of God, Gehazi, saying, this is verse 4, tell me, I pray you, all the great things that Elisha has done. And it came to pass, as he was telling the king how he had restored a dead body to life, that behold, the woman whose son he had restored to life cried to the king. So they're giving you this story. When the woman went to cry to the king, Gehazi was already telling the stories, and the word for telling is written in the Peel Hebrew language, which means it's an ongoing, lengthy story. So he's probably, imagine the stories a lot that Gehazi was telling him with these great, of course he was also mentioning him, what happened to him. And remember what Gehazi was doing, how at his demise, he took the wealth, remember, of Naaman, and said, no, I want, and Naaman said, oh, have more raiments and more wealth. And he's like, okay. Then he hid it on that hill, remember that dark tower, that hill, right before he goes over the ridge to see Elijah, and Elisha's like I don't see that. And Elisha was interesting, and that was the first time you see Elisha making statements of, God gave me, in other words, a foreshadow into the future. He could see it, which is really kind of crazy. Talk about fortune tellers. No, Elisha saw the future because God showed it to him. It's like crazy. He already saw what was happening. He already saw, like you're going to see this later on about Hazael, the king of Syria. He says, I want to see what you're going to do. With Gehazi, he saw what he was doing. Even line of sight was blocking him, but spiritually he could know. And he said, well, how would you know that? He even said, I was there. What do you mean you were there? He told Gehazi that. It means in spirit. It's like I was there. So in this statement of verse 5, it came to pass, he was telling the king about what had happened with this woman. And remember what happened with the woman was she said, I don't want anything from you. Gehazi's the one who said, yeah, she's married to a guy and they're older and they, she don't have any kids. And then so she didn't ask for a kid. Elijah just said, you're going to have a son. She's like, well, don't deceive me. She said that. Don't deceive me. Because later on when he died, she said, didn't I tell you not to deceive me? Well, in other words, don't promise me something that is going to end up in breaking my heart. And so here, Gehazi's telling that story. You could see he's probably telling the whole story about how that would be. And all of a sudden, at that same time, she comes in and cries to the king. And then Gehazi in verse 5 said to, my lord, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son, whom Elisha restored to life. So at this point, he was 7 years old. He was restored to life. Some time had passed by. He's now a little older now, and she's here. And verse 6, and when the king asked the woman, she told him, in other words, he's asking her, what are you beseeching me for? What are you appealing to me for? So the king appointed to her, this is where you get the restoration of where she was a type of an earthy one. He appointed her a certain officer. Yes?
Vicky said, question, was Gehazi a leper at this time, or
No.
does Scripture revisiting this story? The curse was for Gehazi to be a leper forever.
Yep. Yeah, he was still a leper. He was still a leper, which is interesting. So he was in the king's, So he was in that, I think that personally, my opinion is, he was separate from, the king had him as an emissary that he would call on. He wouldn't like commingle, to your point. He and his family were leprosy forever. They didn't stop doing that, to your point. So he would just call him in because he saw, why would you not have a guy who had 3 of his family members and him now become the avenue from which God would then provide sustenance to the whole people. So he just held him in high regard, saying how God used him. Jehoram's like this, by the way. You'll see him. Remember going, to remind you, let's see Jehoram's character. Go back to chapter 6, verse 21 and 22. Remember, Jehoram's character is kind of off. He's an odd human. Well, let's tell you what, let's go back a little further. Let me show you about Jehoram, how he's really not a good guy, okay? So Jehoram, let's look at Jehoram first of all, and I want you to see him as the person who he was, which is not a good guy. And then I want you to see what he reacts to Elisha and God. Then it'll kind of speak to how he reacts to Gehazi here. So chapter 3, where he comes into view, just the first 3 verses of that chapter, Jehoram, son of Ahab, began to reign over Israel, to remind you. But then it says in verse 2, he wrought evil in the sight of the Lord, but not like his father, and like his mother. He put away the images of Baal, for that his father had made. Nevertheless, he cleaved unto sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, and which made Israel to sin. He departed not therefrom. In other words, he wasn't an idol worshiper of Baal. He was a rebellious person in his heart. He had the same evil as mom and dad did. They just relegated it to Baal's worship, idol, temple stuff. He's like, I don't care about no temple, no idol. I worship and do whatever I want. I'm just inherently evil. I don't need some god or some idol or some temple. So I would say that's even worse than doing what he did, because he's going to wherever the highest bidder is. He'll go to, and by the way, he already showed that, remember? He'll go to Baal if he wants to. He'll go to some other god if he wants to. He doesn't care about being privy to one god over another. He could care less. But what's interesting is, he's evil, but yet, you go over a couple of my pages in my Bible, 2 pages over in chapter 6, verse 21 and 22, when the king of Israel said to Elisha, when he saw them, he said, my father. What? Jehoram addresses Elisha as father. That's crazy. After he already knows that he's a man to be commanding respect. And we saw that already there. Then we find also, later on, when Elisha tells him not to kill the Syrian armies that he brought before him, he listens to him. Why? He's a man of evil. Why not just take him out? So Jehoram was a different human being. He gave respects to whatever God benefited him. But he had an issue with the God of Israel, because remember, that's how chapter 6 ends. And he says in verse 33, and yet he talked with them, behold, the messengers came down unto him and said, behold, the evil is of the Lord. What should I wait for the Lord any longer? What? So here's the same guy who's saying, I'm evil. Well, why does it surprise me? He calls the Lord evil. Doesn't surprise me. What does surprise me, he respects Elisha's hand, because you see that Elisha has moved in this man's life. God has through Elisha. So now in chapter 8 and verse 5, or 4 and 5 to your point, when he talks to Gehazi, he saw the Lord already moved in Gehazi's life and the lepers to see the food, to identify the food. Without him being brought back to say that testimony, the people die, right? Right? He knows that. So he's talking to Gehazi now, and he's telling this story. So the question to your point is it the continuation of the previous chapter? I would say yes. In other words, Gehazi's there. They're still there. By the way, this didn't last a long time. This food only lasts so long. There was a lot of it. Remember, they traversed 20 miles from here to the edge of the Jordan. All they found was empty camps, horses, donkeys, food, water, gold, and silver, and raiment, clothes. That's all they found, it says. Nothing but tons and tons of needs from who knows how many armies and encampments were there. 20 miles is a lot of miles to walk and traverse and see a lot of that. There's a lot of food, a lot of water, a lot of whatever. But it is what it is. And so now we have him coming later talking to him. Are they talking this whole time? Because he's right there talking to him. So I'm not saying he was appointed to be in his household. I'm saying he was in his household talking to him, because that's where the king is. He's talking to him. And he's telling the story. And the woman went to the king, again referencing that she's going to the king's throne room. So it isn't like, again, when they're traversing this whole way, and Gehazi was originally outside the city walls. Now he's inside the city walls with the king, talking to him, showing a lot. Gehazi's not restored, because Gehazi, by the way, this is interesting to your point, the woman who is restored references an earthly one who is a mature person who did not continue on in faith, whereas Gehazi represents the person who is that person, as you can see here. He's the person who is that unjust steward from Luke 16. Remember the unjust steward? When he says, oh, my stewardship's been taken from me, and I'm too proud to beg, I have no strength to dig. But what does he do? He still helps people out with the wheat and the baths of oil. He does that. Why would you do that? He can't change his position like at all. But he knows, I better help somebody else. I'm emboldened to do that. So that's what Gehazi's doing. He's doing the same thing. He's just doing what he can do. He's not going to change his leprosy consequence. He knows that. He's an unjust steward. So he's the person, as we know about in outer darkness, which is not going to take place till day 8. He has no shot of getting that redemption to get back to his status. He can't get it back. He's lost it forever. Doesn't mean he can't do what's right in relevance to knowing that he's still a guy who's been judged for his wrong, and it's not going to be changed. So in verse 6, it's a good point, Vicki. So in verse 6, when he says, asked the woman, she told him, so he appointed unto her a certain officer, which is the word could be changed to say eunuch or royal officer or royal guard, and all of the fruits of the field. So he said, restore to her all that was hers, and all the fruits of the field, since the day she left the land, even until now. Interesting. So not just the land, but all the fruits thereof. So wait. So therefore, that shows a total restoration. So she is a reference to somebody who not just lost their station, but lost all the benefits of that station. So this is typifying people who say, wait. So to be restored out of like Gehenna or Hades or something, that's already an awesome thing as it is. But then we talk about, wait a minute, you're telling me at the Great White Throne, at the end of day 7, people could be restored and actually given an inheritance as well? Yes. And this is where it's proving that. He says, restore her land and the fruits thereof. The fruits that you have speaks to your inheritance. So this is a lady who's not just been restored as an earthly one, but with a future view to being restored to having an inheritance again, which is amazingly awesome, which shows you how God is very loving and very forgiving and always giving more chances. Yes?
Todd said my version says proceeds. That means all of the money she would have received from the
Correct.
sale of the crop.
Correct. All the benefits. Yeah. So proceeds, fruits. Yes, correct. The proceeds, the fruits, the benefits of if she would have had that land during that time and been overseeing it, what she would have had. Yes. So, which the benefits of what God gives you is like the new wine and the new wineskin. It's the kalos of the agathos. It's the outward manifestation, the fruit yield, the proceeds of what God has given your land, right? So it's a reference of your doctrinal ability God has given you to understand who he is in his word, and then you applying that to bear forth fruit. Those are the proceeds, those are the benefits, the result of, right, what God's given you, because you're transacting, you're trafficking till he comes in his word with him to produce more good fruits. So he says all of that, which is pretty amazing. So that as it is an already, beginning of this chapter, it's like pretty awesome to see a good news on behalf of this bad news. We just saw some horrific cannibalism going on in Israel, their own son. And then we see the king being told you're going to basically be held accountable for the trampling down of your royal officer, your servant, who mocked God, and you did through him mock God. And now we see him switching over to this prophecy of famine and this restoration of this woman, the woman that they gave a son to, who died, who he restored. Now a second time she's restored. Remember, the son was restored to life, typifying a person. He sneezed 7 times, remember, growing up from the brephos, nepios, mikros, teknon, brephos, nepios, mikros, pation, teknon, aniskos, and anir. Those 7 steps of the growth cycle that he went up. So here in verse 7, Elisha came to Damascus. Now, he's changing up now from, he addresses Israel, the woman, and now he's turning to Syria. And this is where it gets really sad. So he comes to Damascus to Ben-Hadad, and the king of Syria was sick. So now he comes to Damascus, which is way up here. It's not even on this map here. You got to go all the way up here. You got to turn this bad boy back a couple of pages. Well, see, it's way up here. It's not even on the map. There you go. Here we go. So he's in Samaria, or Samaria. He goes all up to Damascus, and now, Damascus. So now he's seeing the king. It's actually off the map. It's over here. So it's over this way. So he goes up to Damascus to see Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, who was sick, and he told him, saying, the man of God is come hither. And the king said unto Hazael, take an offering in your hand and go. The word offering here is the word minha, which means to bring forth a tribute, or he says, it may say present in your translation, but it means what you think it means, an offering. It's the same exact word, just so you know, used of Abel in Genesis when it says he brought forth his offering. So the first time it's used as an offering, it meant what Abel meant it to make. Remember, in Hebrews it says Abel brought forth his gifts and offerings. Interesting. So he brought more than his offerings, which is why later on you're going to see Hazael bring forth 40 camels full with stuff. Like, oh my gosh. So he says, bring an offering in your hand and go. He goes overboard, this Hazael does, because of what Ben-Hadad told him. Meet the man of God. And he says, inquire. And this is a phrasing in this grammatical structure, meaning to diligently, ongoingly seek of him and say, shall I recover from this disease? In other words, the word disease is the word coli. That sounds familiar to nurses, people think of E. coli, right? It means any kind of sickness or disease. So Ben-Hadad has a sickness that's unto death. We don't know how old he is at this point. We do know that he's reigned for a little bit of time. He's been a part of the death of Ahab. He's been a part of seeing things happen with his armies being basically given clemency through Elisha's hand. So he also, like Jehoram, is not a God who worships Israel, he is the God of Israel, but he gives respects to where he knows they're just due. So he's like, okay, fine. Because he knows, remember, Naaman, we know, is possibly the one of his emissaries, of his right arm, that he threw the arrow and it happened to hit Ahab in between his armor and kill him. He knew doggone well that was a miracle in itself. He's like, come on. And Naaman even said, I just was drawing the arrow. I didn't aim for that. The scripture says that God put the arrow. So Naaman knew, Ben-Hadad knew that he delivered Ahab into their hands. Ben-Hadad also knew that Elisha let his armies go free and actually fed them and had them go home. And he's like, okay. But he's the same guy who put a besiegement upon Israel because of their famine that caused them to eat each other's kids. So he's not a good guy. He's just a guy that respects who benefits him. You know, the selfish type of arrogant people we have and kings of this day and back then. So he says in verse 8 again, I want you to ongoingly inquire. In other words, this means everything to me. Don't you leave without getting an answer about what's going to happen with my sickness. So in verse 9, so Hazael went to meet him. This is the same Hazael. Remember that God told Elijah, you're going to anoint him, and you're going to anoint Hazael the king, successor in Syria. You're going to anoint Elisha because your days are gone. You're done. What? Yeah, you're going to be. Your time. You're going to cross over, and you're going to come see me, and we're done. We'll talk about it later. So okay. So this is the same Hazael. Now it's coming to fruition. Now Elisha's the one who now is seeing the benefits of this, or I should say the prophecy of this fulfillment. So Hazael went to go meet him, verse 9. He took a present with him, which is the offering, the minha, of every, now that's what it said, of every good thing of Damascus, 40 camels burden. And he came and stood before him. Now, wait, whoa. Camels we know represent an animal that's typified specifically of the heavenly sphere of the kingdom, not the earthly sphere. Why is that? Because camels have a large storage of water. Camels have wearied knees, speaking to the prayerful, penitent life of someone. Camels can travel long distances and endure much trial of heat and pressure and affliction. So, and plus we know that some people use those. The Magi were on camels. And you have other people on. Regal people can be on donkeys. Jesus could be on a horse or could be on a camel. But camels are specifically among the regality people that have the camels. Not just anybody has camels. So when they ascend on these things. So when you see 40 of them, 40 is God's number for trial and testimony, how interesting is it that he comes with an offering of every good thing of Damascus? Now what that would be? It would be from food to wine to clothing to everything you can name that Damascus had to offer. And then you have 40 camels, again, trial and tribulation, testing, and he comes to face him as if it says, now thy son Ben-Hadad, king of Assyria, has sent me to thee, saying, shall I recover from this disease? So he's coming with 40 camels filled with good things, which typifies he himself is going through, Syria that is going to have a time of trial and testing and tribulation. But Hazael, as you're going to find later on, acts like, I don't know what you're talking about, Elisha, when you say I'm going to kill the sons of Israel. I don't know what you're talking about. Why am I a dog that I would do that? But that is what's going to happen. But it tells you a lot about sovereignty. He had no idea of what God said he would do. And it wasn't a good thing either. So much for like the Arthur Pink Book of Sovereignty. People want to argue, well, God knew what I was going to do, and that's why he decreed it. Well, then he reacts to you. That's what that means. That's not right. God doesn't react to you. So here, Hazael is even showing you, later on, he's going to say, I don't know what you're talking about. Why would I do that? You don't understand. And Elisha starts to weep about it. But interesting enough, that's why he brought the 40, not even knowing it, he brought 40 offerings. Remember, did Benadad tell him to bring 40 camels? No. He told him to bring an offering. He went over and above and beyond the offering and brought 40 camels worth of offering too. Because he didn't even know it, God set him up to typify the trial and tribulation, not only upon Syria, but what he would bring upon Israel. Which speaks to what's going on is the trial and tribulation is going to come upon, not on the board, but I can point behind me, but the second half of tribulation, the Sumedicos people, the children, all these people that are alive. People think that there's not going to be any babies and children alive during tribulation, but that's not true. People are going to do what they do normally. There's going to be kids. Some of them are going to die. And that's what Elisha was crying for. He's like, this is horrific. I can't believe I'm here to tell you what I know that I'm going to tell you. And God's shown what's going to happen through your hand. How do you deal with that? He can't change it. But it is what it is. And he has to just absorb that fact that he's going to be living a life of this trauma and tragedy and depression all around him, of the moms and families just disrupted, these little kids. It says children and sons, which means teenage to young adults down to little people. He's going to kill them both. It's like, oh my God. Then he takes pregnant women, he says, and he's going to like rape and murder them. Oh my gosh. So you're going to, this is what he says. So the 40 camels represents an unknown trial tribulation that Syria is going to have, how God's going to bring about them a trial and tribulation unto them, and how they're going to be used to bring that unto Israel, which typifies those of the tribulation period under the same duress. So they're going to be brought under that trial and tribulation from the beast, who's now the opponent as the pale horse. And it came, and so verse 10, he says, and Elisha said unto him, go say unto him, in living you shall surely recover. However, or howbeit, the Lord has showed me that in dying you shall die. What? Meaning, you're going to die, you're going to recover, you won't die from this sickness, but you will die. Okay, well that is kind of a mixed signal. I mean, so it's interesting enough to know that oftentimes that's why people always ask me, my mom's now in ICU, we have people in different situations with different parents, right? So that's why, this is not to be cold or callous, but you should always pray, obviously, for the welfare of other people. I get that. But the ultimate is their spiritual well-being, because they're going to die. The wages of sin is death. So whether they recover or not from their sickness is not really the relevant issue, because they're going to die. In Benadad's case, he was murdered by Hazael. He actually suffocated him. We're going to see this a bit later. He kind of like waterboarded him. He's not a good guy. So anyway, which is, by the way, on the heels of him saying, I would never do these bad things. Okay, yeah, right. That's why you murdered your own king. Okay, that makes no sense. By a guy who's trying to claim he's innocent. So here in verse 10, when he said, okay, you're going to die, you're going to be recovered, but you're going to die. Then in verse 11 of 2 Kings 8, he says, and he settled his countenance steadfastly until he was ashamed, and the man of God wept. Now this is an interesting exchange. So you're talking about people, this is a typifying state for me. I think it typifies to me. People who say to me to this day, I would never take the mark of the beast. I would never take the mark of the beast. But you already do that already. We do it, all of us have already taken a social security number. How's that not taking on a mark that you didn't intend to be used as a place of commerce? Try to have no social security number and do commerce in our country. You can't do it. You have to have that to have a driver's license, to get a job, social security, all that stuff that ties into it, credit. How's that not, you're not taking a mark of the beast, but you're taking a mark to transact commerce. And you act like, I would never do it. You do it all the time to your kids. And our parents did it to us, so I don't understand why you don't see that. So it's going to be even more palatable then when they're going to have their very sustenance and liquid and water and food depending upon it. So people in Christ will go, boo, and they'll take the mark of the beast. Yes, they will. They won't worship him. They're not going to do that. They're not that dumb. But they will take his mark under the deception that it's better than starving to death than dying. I need food and water for my wife and my kids and my family. And I get that. But here, in Hazael's case, he's a type of these people who, as in doing so, Elisha is going to turn to those people as if to say, do you realize what you're doing? So Elisha is the one who's turning to him, and he's staring him down as if it's just like with it, not an ugliness, not just like a sense. I can't even, the face I can see him give is one of frustration, disdain, one of just utter sadness and depression, all mixed in. And until he just keeps staring at him. Until finally Hazael just breaks down like, okay, like I'm ashamed that you're telling that whatever you're about to say obviously is not good for me. That's right, it's not. Yes.
Tracy said, cell phone and chip your kids now, sad face.
Yeah, they've been doing that chip stuff. I've been hearing about the chip. When I first heard about the things regarding the spermicide and the kingdom things of God to come and all these different things, I remember hearing about back in Janet Reno's day and Bill Clinton, how they were doing things about putting chips in human beings. I heard about it all ever since the 1990s. But now it's actually more palatable. I think this year, there were some students in some Ivy League schools that were doing this right now. They were doing it as like an experiment to say, I forget where it's at, like your wrist or something. They were putting a chip in there to like that whole pay and go stuff. They would swipe their hand to do their gas and groceries. Anyway, so here in verse 11, Elisha settles his countenance, means he stares intently until he was ashamed, meaning Hazael was ashamed. And then the man of God wept. I can't even imagine how long that took. Was that minutes? Was that 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 3 minutes? I don't know, but I wouldn't want to be Hazael in that situation. I wouldn't want to be Elisha in that situation. He is staring at him with the understanding of the view to what will happen. Hazael has no idea. Hazael knows his own disposition of his heart is not good. He does know that. He's an evil guy. But he doesn't know the gravity of his sins, of what they're about to be. But Elisha does. And Elisha is the one who the sins are going to be against his people. And so he's staring at him as if to say, I know what you're about to do in murder your king. I know what you're about to do in being king. God's going to have you be used to kill sons and children, and then rape and kill women that are pregnant too, of my people. I couldn't even imagine that. And he's looking at him, and he's talking to this man. I would personally, my sinful person, I don't wring his neck myself. I'd want to punch him in the face. I wouldn't want to talk to him. I'm just being honest with you. I mean, come on. He's going to kill children and sons and rape and murder women that are pregnant. And you want me to talk to this guy like, oh, let me give you some word of God. No, let me give you a punch in the face. I mean, I wouldn't want to talk to this guy. And here's Elisha. No wonder he's just staring. I mean, I can just imagine him being boiled over with anger, thinking, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that. But Lord, why are you doing this, man? And he's just looking at him like, do you know who you are? Do you know the gravity of what God's going to use you to do to exercise his justice amongst his people? So before you get into that point of it, I want to stop here just for a moment. So I want to show you something. I'm going to go to my dialogue. No, let me go back to, I'm going to go to this scripture here. Let me go to a scripture over in First Kings chapter 8. Let me show you something about what Solomon said. Solomon himself said about famine. I want to read there's about 6 verses that I want to read about famine, because it brings to mind what I believe Elisha is thinking about when he's staring intently at Hazael. I think he's thinking this. Because Solomon, remember the wise man Solomon, he was in his good state when he was building the temple. And he says in verse 35 of 1 Kings 8 to verse 40, here's what he says. When heaven is shut up and there is no rain, this is his prayer. He's praying as he's like giving a covenant, he's giving his offering unto the house of God that he built. And he's praying this. He was done in a good heart, good spiritual mindset here. Verse 35 of 1 Kings 8, Solomon says, when heaven is shut up and there is no rain, that's happened, because they have sinned against you. Now you know why God does it. If they pray toward this place and confess to your name and turn from their sin when you afflict them. Gosh. Did it say when Syria afflicts them? No. When Babylon afflicts them? No, I guess he meant to say when the Greeks and the Romans and the Medes and the Persians. Nope. God afflicts them. Gosh, that is so... This is where they weren't even a divided kingdom. This is Solomon, the last of the united kings under Saul, David, now him. And then he says in verse 36, then hear thou in heaven and forgive the sins of your servants and of the people Israel, that thou teach them the good way. Notice how he says, forgive the sins of your servants and of your people. This speaks to what Daniel said. He says, we have sinned. A man who was thought to be very righteous, because remember, God includes him in Ezekiel 14:14 amongst Daniel, Job, and Noah as the righteous men he references. So Daniel's not no sinful guy. He's a sinner, but he's not like a person outwardly. He's known to be a very righteous man. He says, we sinned. That's why Solomon's saying, your servants, I mean, even your prophets, we've not done right by you and your people. And then he says, and thou teach them the good way wherein they should walk, and give rain upon the land. Remember, by the way, he says, forgive the sins of your servants. Remember when Elisha, it was kind of funny, when he's looking at, he was with Jehoshaphat when Jehoram came to ask for help to go against Edom, and he looks at Jehoram and says, I'm basically paraphrase, you disgust me, I don't even want to look at you. The only reason I'm here talking right now to you is because Jehoshaphat's here. Otherwise, you could just, pound sand, because you're an evildoer. I don't like you, like, at all. And he had to pause for a moment and gather his thoughts. You remember that? Because he was angry. So Elisha was just like Daniel. He had moments where he was still a sinner and he had anger toward the evil. That's what I'm thinking he's talking about here, and Solomon's talking about. But here he says in verse 36, he says, teach them their good way and where they should walk, and give rain upon the land. Now watch this. Where thou hast given to thy people for an inheritance. If there be in the land famine, if there be pestilence, blasting, mildew, locust, or even a caterpillar, if their enemy besieged them, which is what they had happened, they besieged twice during these 5 famines. 2 of them were besieged famines. Other 3 were done by God directly by having no rain. In the land of their cities, whatsoever plague, whatsoever sickness there be, what prayer and supplication soever be made by any man, or by all the people of Israel, which shall know every man the plague of his own heart. And the Chronicles, when it retells the prayer, it says he'll know his own plague and he'll know his own grief. Yeah, because famine will do that to you. Trial and tribulation brings about your own personal journey of your own sense of pain and grief. But in Solomon's prayer, and it first recorded in 1 Kings 8, it says the plague of his own heart. And spread forth his hands toward his house. Let him know this. In other words, God is doing remember, when God does the famine, he actually holds back the rain. When Nebuchadnezzar did it in Zedekiah's day, or when Ben-Hadad did it in 2 Kings chapter 6, they besieged the city. They didn't hold back rain. They just held back provisions to the city until they starved him out. So 2 different kinds of famine. One was man-induced, one was God-induced. Both done by God ultimately, but different methods. Verse 39 and 40, then hear thou in heaven the dwelling place, and forgive and work and give to every man according to his ways, whose heart thou knows. For thou, even thou only, knows the hearts of all children of men, that they may fear you all the days that they live, in the land which thou gave unto our fathers. They may fear and they may live. They know the purpose. So God's doing this because of their sins and because he wants them to fear and to live for him. So you think Elisha's thinking about that right now? He's thinking, my people brought this on themselves. I get it. I get it. God's going to afflict them, but boy, doesn't make it. One of my friends told me long ago, he said, I love seeing prophecy fulfilled. I just hate living in the time where I got to see the grief of it. I'm like, wow, that's a powerful statement you just made, because it's true. Because everybody wants to see God's word being fulfilled until you realize the magnitude of that means both things are true. You're living in a time of glorious times, but that means that not for everybody will it be glorious. And you got to understand that. And that's a painful thing. So he's like, I can't wait for the rapture to happen. Well, that means that bad things are coming on a lot of people. Remember, of about 8 billion we talked about, you're talking less than 1 billion roughly, or about 1 billion are going to survive. The 7 billion will just be slaughtered. It's just, oh my gosh, it's just horrific. So this is what Elisha is typifying, seeing in his mind, which speaks to this whole, I think, again, greater scale of typology, loss of life during tribulation period. We shouldn't be, cheerful or gleeful about God's prophecies coming to pass. We should be happy, but tempered with the sense of, hey, wait a minute now. There should be some grief there for the others who aren't so fortunate. You got to be, because Elisha did that. He's fulfilling God's word, but he wasn't happy about it. He has some joy in knowing he's doing God's will, but he's not happy what the word is going to bring about. Yes?
Pam and Tracy are wondering what scripture you're on.
Well, I was in 1 Kings chapter 8, 35 to 40. Now I'm going back to 2 Kings chapter 8, and now I'm in verse 11 again, where he says he stared at his countenance steadfastly till he was ashamed, and the man of God wept. And now I'm in 2 Kings chapter 8. So again, I just referenced 1 Kings chapter 8, verses 35 to 40, the prayer of Solomon dedicating the temple. And so just to give a reference to what famine meant and how Elisha would definitively know about that as a prophet of God. He would not not know what a king of Solomon's stature at that point had stated about God and the famine. Yes?
Isn't Elisha wasn't in a prayer mode when this was given to him. He's just going about his daily business, and then he gets this revelation.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like the still small voice because it's the Old Testament,
Yep.
but the Lord informed him.
Yep. He did.
He wasn't even praying.
And by the way, look, Elijah goes under one famine. He goes, only I, and only I. And remember, God asked him twice, why are you here? Why are you here? And he says the same thing twice, like a bonehead. He says, because they're after me and I'm the one. No, gosh, no, that's not why you're here. Stop lying. Stop lying. You're lying to yourself. You're here because you're afraid of Jezebel. You're here because you didn't stand for what you believe, what I told you to believe. You're so used to fighting or fleeing, you forgot to stand. That's why you're here. Say it. He wouldn't say it. And God, fine, I'm going to shelf you. What? No, that's what you get. You can't do that. And here goes, one famine caused him to crack like that as a man of 30 fruit. There's a distinction between the two different. What does the maturity level look like between 30 fruit and 60 fruit? Or the scripture would say teleosis, a lower maturity, or teleotis, a higher level maturity. What it looks like is Elisha goes under 1, 2, 3 famines. He's holding his own. He has 3 more famines compared to the one Elijah went under. He's fine because he was that much more mature. He could take the affliction and persecution. But did he take it with a callousness and a testosterone man? No. He showed his emotions. He cried. He lamented. He showed his anger earlier when he said, I told you earlier about Jehoram. He still was emotional about it. He wasn't like clean skate all the way through. No. He had his moments where he cracked. But overall, he never turned against God. He never refused to believe and understand his purpose and his place and his position within God's will in his life. He understood that. Elijah did not. At first, but he did when he left in that chariot of fire. Oh, he knew. He can't wait to come back. If I was to read his mind right now, which I cannot, but if I imagine he's going, oh, I can't wait. Oh, I can't wait to apply all the things that he already knows. He's not like he's waiting to learn. He's already learned. He's waiting to apply it. You just can't. Will you imagine? It's like you're ready for your test. You can't wait to teacher to give it to you because you've studied and you know it cold. You just can't wait for test day. He can't wait. The tribulation begins when it comes to that piece of it. Him making right by the times that he was cut short because he wasn't doing it earlier the right way. Moses is the same way. They both know what's going to be in store for them. They're both chopping at the bit in a positive direction way in that sense.
They're going to die too.
Yeah, but be raised up. It's pretty awesome. So here, going back to 2 Kings chapter 8, verse 12. So Hazael says, why weep, my Lord? Now he calls him my Lord, which is, again, he doesn't even understand the gravity of why he's weeping. All he knows is, I'm ashamed because of the look on your face. There's something going on there, and obviously because of who you are, you know more than I do. So obviously you see something, know something that caused you to feel this way. So I'm ashamed because I don't know what's going on. But obviously something's not good for me. And he answered and said, because I know the evil that you will do unto the sons of Israel. He says, you will burn their strongholds. You'll set them on fire, number 1. And their young men you will slay with the sword, and you will dash or cut in two their children. And then you'll rip up the women with children. Rip them up, which means you'll cut them open. Hitler, by the way, would do this during World War II, by the way. I used to, when I was a person in high school, I won't forget it. It's the most horrific memory I have of a teacher telling me, go do a study on World War II. And I'm like, why? And then I'm like, okay. So I remember Hitler doing all these experiments with animals and women and ripping up their wombs and taking out the baby and putting a cat in there alive and letting it claw his way out and stuff like this. He's a disgusting human being. And he was just a weird dude. He was just doing all kinds of like bestiality and all kinds of experimentation on women, especially those who were pregnant, because he wanted to rip the baby out, see if it could be sustained by an ape, because he believed in evolution too, by the way. And so, because they don't, no one wants to, I mentioned this many times in the past, but of course he was inspired by Darwin's Origin of the Species book, who, by the way, Darwin was a believer in God, who turned away because people didn't have answers for him about things because they're just ignorant. So he then went to this whole evolution thing, which in his book he wrote that black people are lesser than white people. What? That's wrong. And then Hitler, that's why he liked the whole blonde hair, blue-eyed thing, Aryan race thing. But no one talks about that, because that is not in the books anymore, the Origin of the Species. But don't believe me, look it up yourself. The original book had a chapter that said he hated black people. Excuse me? What is that about? That's not godly at all. That's not even scriptural. It's totally bogus. But he put it in there. And that's what Hitler was basing his killing of people that were Jews or Jehovah's Witnesses or gays. He killed them all because they didn't represent the perfection of the human race. To him, it was a word picture of survival of the fittest. So that's what it reminds me of. A guy like Hitler. Imagine Hazael's like a Hitler-esque foreshadow of what he was going to do to the people of Israel. It's just disgusting. Yes?
Laney said Google sold Pitchon and his mother during those days.
What'd you say? What'd you say, Ben? He sold?
So, S-O-L and then Pitchon and his mother during those days.
I don't know who that is. You know who that is? Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that name. Okay, I'm lost a little bit on that name. Sorry. But here, so when he says in verse 13, Hazael says that. Well, here's what I was mentioning before. He's surprised by this statement. He says, well, but what is your servant a dog, that he should work this great thing? Really? Like he's acting like he's not incapable of this. Now, you may not know the gravity of your sins, but don't tell me you don't know the disposition of your heart. Come on, man. He knows doggone well he's hell bent on doing evil. So I don't know why he's so shocked by the gravity of the evil he's going to do. That just, to me, that's disingenuous, that statement he makes. And Elijah answered and said, the Lord has showed it to me, that thou shalt be king over Syria. So that's interesting because Hazael obviously didn't know that. And so he didn't know, like, he's trying to play, well, I'm not even king. I can't do that. Don't even try this, man, okay? The God already showed me you're going to be king, okay?
Wasn't he Benadad's son?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
First of all, Laney said this person that she mentioned, he lives in Clearwater, and he told me what happened to his mother under Hitler's reign.
Oh, gotcha. That's who that was.
And then Vicky has a question. 1 Kings 19:15 through 18, the Lord told Elijah to anoint
Correct.
Hazael king over Syria
Yep.
and Jehu as king over Israel.
Yep.
This must have fallen to Elisha in the future, right? Was Hazael in a royal line?
Well, remember when God tells Elijah to anoint Hazael and Jehu, remember what that's representing. It was the end of the line of Ahab's line. And then also, in his case, Benadad's associated with the death of Ahab. So God just wanted to make sure he knew he was anointing him. But think of it no differently than how Samuel anointed David. But he wasn't king right away, right? It was a while later before he became king. So it's the same thing here. So yes, Elijah did anoint him. That did happen. But Elisha is the one who saw the anointing come to fruition of what God has stated. Just like Jehu wasn't king until later. But he's not even king yet. He comes up a little bit later. Next chapter over is when he takes out Jehoram and Ahaziah and Jezebel. Like he just 1, 2, 3. Yes.
Is it possible that if Ahab had obeyed God and had killed Ben-Hadad when he was supposed to, that Hazael wouldn't have even been born?
That's a good point. Maybe so. Maybe so. But that goes back to Abram to begin with. If he didn't have Sarah's words to say, here's Hagar to have as to wife, to have Ishmael, you wouldn't have strife with today in the Middle East, right? But you can't. That's part of the process.
Yeah, and then Hezekiah living 15 more years.
Yeah, Hezekiah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So when you go into going back to 2 Kings in chapter 8 again, he goes into verse 14. So he departs after he tells him, look, God already showed me you're going to be king. In other words, just stop your foolishness of your talk. You can tell he's like with a forked tongue. And so Elisha just says, so he departed from Elisha and came to his master. Now watch how Hazael knows he's lying through his teeth. And what he does, you can just see it, next two verses. So he comes back to his master, which is Hazael goes back to Benadad. And he says to him, what Elijah say to you? And he answered, he told me that in living you shall live. And it came to pass on the morrow, on the next day after he told him that, he took a thick cloth, dipped it in water, spread it on his face, so he died. And Hazael reigned in his stead. Now, wait a second. Just so you know, that's a thick cloth is known to be like the way it's written, it's like a carpet. It's like that thick. So it has a little bit of pores in it, but when you pour water in it, then you can't breathe through those pores. So he suffocated him, like asphyxiation. So he's just like waterboarding somebody, right? It's not fun. I mean, and by the way, how you just don't put a cloth on someone's face who's already who's already recovering from the sickness, and the next day he didn't like he can't move his arms. So that means you killed him. You put like a pillow on it, like you see in the movies, reading a book or something. He shoved it in his face to kill him. He's not a good guy. And this is the same guy who says, would your servant be a dog to do this? Oh, please. You're the same murderous wretch who's going to kill the king and act like you would never be capable of such a thing, of killing the sons of Israel and raping women. Come on, man. This guy is a disgusting. And that's why Elisha said back in verse, I can just see his tone probably going, yeah. The Lord already showed me. Don't hold your breath. Save your lives for someone else. I already saw it. Doesn't matter.
Probably so old anyway, Ben-Hadad. He couldn't wait for him to die. It probably
Yeah.
would have been much longer.
That's what some people think is some people think he was actually of a matured age that was not toward being elderly, and some say he's elderly. And even the record in Syria kind of differs on it, actually. It's interesting. But they all say the same thing, that he was murdered. But they don't say that he was, they differ on how old he was. Was he older and that's why he was sick? But that's not what it says in Scripture. He became sick. So was it a sickness unto his age, or was it a sickness that was premature to his age? So that's the whole debate with no one really, there's different sides of that story. So here in verse 16, now it says, in the 5th year of Joram, this word gets interesting. You got to follow the bouncing ball here, because we talked about on Friday, Joram is a nickname for Jehoram, or another name for Jehoram, which is, again, there's two Jehorams. There's Jehoram, king of Judah, who's son of Jehoshaphat, and Jehoram, king of Israel, son of Ahab, two different kings. But in verse 16 it says, in the 5th year of Joram, or Jehoram, son of Ahab of Israel, Jehoshaphat being then king of Judah, Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, became to reign. It's like, okay, why you say it like that, God? Jeez, oh man, can you just make it easier to understand? It kind of flows, like it confuses you. Like, is there one Jehoram or two? But there's two Jehorams. So in verse 17 he says, and he was a son of 32 years old. This is the one from the son of Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, king of Judah. And he began to reign. He reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. And he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, as did the house of Ahab. Why? Because it was the daughter of Ahab that was his wife. Ew. Well, that's bad. Remember Jehoshaphat, he probably would have got that idea, but Jehoshaphat went to go to his call when Ahab said, help me. Because remember, the armies were low, and they had fought, they were depleted. And the king of Edom, Syria, Ben-Hadad thought, time to go get him. He wanted to get Edom. They all wanted to come against him. And so he goes, no, let's go get Edom. Judah said, Edom's part of my, what do you call it? It's the word, like a regime, part of my regime. They're under my guard. Let's get them and their armies, and we'll, all three of us come and we'll beat Syria. Because Ben-Hadad was thinking, you guys are weakened by your battles and by the death of all this famine. I got you where I want you. So remember that this is what's going on here, is that Jehoram was probably, I'd imagine, from this interaction over this time of war, they were probably in this place where he saw Ahab's family and saw the daughter of Ahab and said, oh, wow, I'll take her to my life. Oh, my God. Jehoshaphat's
son that takes Ahab's daughter.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
God.
Jehoshaphat's going, I didn't come here to intermingle with their life. I came here to be at one with the people of God. But this is part of the exchange you got to be careful of. To me, the typology and lesson learned here is, this is what happens to all of us in life. When you're being loving and kind, I don't think Jehoshaphat did the wrong thing. No, he did not. He did not do that. He did the right thing, king of Judah, and helping to go be there for Ahab, to defend his people from being killed by Ben-Hadad of Syria. Did the right thing. It's the right thing. However, it doesn't change the fact that when you do the right thing, helping out someone who's not living right, the consequence is you got to be able to understand you're subjecting yourself to some unfortunate consequence. In his case, yeah, it's just like someone who says, it's like someone who, it reminds me of the old days when the doctor would go in and there was a fever, and he would go, he or she, or he usually, no offense, but it usually was a he, but they would go in and they would subject themselves to the sickness on behalf of the townspeople to get well, but they themselves could be sick and die. Well, you know that going in, but that's not what you're thinking about, right? You're thinking about saving the people. So I think it's the same thing with happened to Joseph. He wasn't thinking about the ramifications, how it would affect his family or his people. He knew that, but he wasn't thinking about that. That wasn't his forethought. His forethought was, save the people of God. They're still my brothers living in rebellion, and I get it, but they're still God's people. I got to help them. And even the king's evil, I get that too, but I got to help them. And he's helping them. And oftentimes, we have that happen to us. But just know, don't be shocked when ramifications of your action to do something in love affect you negatively. And that's the part that really is, and I've had that happen to me before. You go in love just to those who need love of people of God who are living in rebelliousness or iniquity. And what happens? You do what's right, and you act like, I don't know why ramifications happened to me that were so negative. Well, why does that surprise you? You were around wickedness. It's going to attach itself to you. It's going to somehow spill over onto you. In this case, his son. I couldn't even imagine Jehoshaphat's thoughts were, oh my gosh. I can imagine him and his wife going, really, son? Out of all the things. Because you know this guy's a Yahoo. His daughter's no different. Okay.
And then the Lord kept the nations from attacking Judah while Jehoshaphat was king. I mean, he was
Yep.
such a good guy, and such a shame what
Yep.
his son did.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how many people I know that have been dating or engaged in marriage or married or whatnot that have said to me, "Oh, you don't understand. They're like da 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 da." It doesn't matter how much good you want to put on it, and what you're doing good, and how you whatever met and what all that. Intrinsically of itself, are they or are they not seeking to obey and be right with God? Because if they're not, and you're having a relationship with them, don't be shocked when ramifications come your way and it spills over into a negative result in your life. Well, I don't know why you're shocked by that, but I constantly counsel people all the time on this issue. All the time. They always get shocked when they're like, oh, why it's happened? You don't know why it's happened. It's going to happen again if you don't really kind of confess your sin here. Come on, get real. Get real. Get real. Or if it's not a sin, in this case, Joseph didn't do a sin, but confess the fact that this is what happens. That's the reality. So have your guard way up and acknowledge what it is, or if your guard's not up, you're just sinning ignorantly, then that's on you. That's on you. Joseph wasn't sinning. I believe his problem was he was not thinking about it. He didn't put forth parameters to his son. He should have put forth different parameters that didn't allow this for this to happen. That's my opinion. But sometimes they say you can't stop people who fall for each other. True, but I don't know. I just don't think he's exempt from the equation. But in verse 19, it says, "Yet the Lord would not destroy Judah for David's sake, his servant's sake, as he promised to him to give him always a light, and to his children and to his sons." So remember what that's about. That goes back to, so you got to read this, 2 Samuel chapter 7. Go to 2 Samuel to remind you what he's talking about there. Now we know this, but it's important to remember it. So in 2 Samuel chapter 7, so according to 2 Samuel chapter 7, you'll read in verse, well, not to read everything, but it's verse 8 to 17, but here's some highlights here from verse 13. "He will build a house for my name. I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be for him as father, and he will be me as son. If he commit iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men and with the stripes of the children of men, but by my mercy I shall not depart from him, as I took it aside from Saul, whom I put away before you. And thy house and thy kingdom shall be established forever before you. Thy throne shall be established forever." According to all these words and according to all this vision did Nathan speak to David. So David heard this promise from God that he can do all this evil he wants. Not that he's going to, not to say it, but not going to change God's statement of fact. This is what they call a unilateral covenant. Okay, God had both. Remember, I do this in marriage counseling. I kind of a trick question: is a covenant unilateral or bilateral? And the answer is yes. It's both. Depends on how God uses it. With Abraham in Genesis 12, it was unilateral. I'll bless those that bless you, curse those that curse you. It had nothing to do with Abraham. Just like here, it had nothing to do with David. God just said, I'm going to do this. It's a unilateral covenant. Then there's bilateral covenants, as we saw in Deuteronomy 28. Mount Gerizim, the blessings, Mount Ebal, the cursings were shouted down because God reminded them, you serve me, I'll bless you. You disobey me, I will curse you. I'm not playing with you. It's not funny. So this is where in 2 Kings 8, that he's being reminded we're being reminded about why it is that God did not take Judah out, because many would say at this point, oh, wait a minute. Like Peter said about John, reminds me of the resurrection. Remember, he goes, what about him? And Jesus said, what is that to you? What is that to you? If I have him live till the days are long, what is that to you? So here the writer would be, in this case, telling us, don't worry about what is that to Judah, even though it is heinous to have, obviously, you're going to have two kings in a row now, and Jehoram and Hazael, that are both bad guys, and Judah connected to the house of Ahab, which God clearly stated, more evil was done by him than any king before or after him combined. So that would mean Judah kind of sucks too then. That means they're not good people either. And that'd be your conclusion, and God wants to put in there a little snippet to go, not so fast. I made a promise to them under King David. So it's a little different. So just remember. So this is where the priviness of being a part of people of covenant, for example, comes in. Some people say, well, I can live evil, and I get put to Jehoshaphat one day in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Coincidentally, Jehoshaphat's his name, right? The Valley of Jehoshaphat is the forward typology of I can live ugly and beyond the grave, evil and wicked to God, and he's going to pummel me in Jehoshaphat. But yet the Jewish people can do that, and they don't get the same recourse. God goes, not so fast. It's different. I had a covenant with them. Just like right here. People say, it's not fair. It's not fair. Where does it say I have to be fair? Where does it say that? I'll do what I want to do. I didn't make a promise with you, King of Israel, Northern Kingdom, rebellious. All 20 of you are evildoers. I didn't make any promises with you like this. This I did. I didn't have a throne in the Northern Kingdom of Israel. My throne was in Jerusalem. That's where they are. Judah, not you. So then in verse 20, so in the days of Jehoram, this is the king of Judah, Jehoram, Edom revolts. This goes back to that story we talked about before when they were with Judah as a subtext over here. Edom, right here, remember they went to the river to come in and fight. And so Edom actually here has another king that they appoint, it says, and they revolted under the hand of Judah, and they made a king for themselves. So Jehoram, or Joram, went over to Zair and all the chariots with him, and he rose by night, which again, whenever it uses that phrasing by night, speaks something of being ignorant here, and he smote the Edomites, which compassed him about, and the captains of the chariots, and the people fled in their tents. You think it's over? Nope. In verse 22, yet Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah unto this day, which means they were free, which means that the attack of Jehoram did not work. The pushing them back didn't work. So under Jehoram's reign in Judah, who married the daughter of Ahab from Israel, he was an evil person who came against Edom, and Edom revolted, and he killed them, but then the initial onslaught, but in the long run, they won out. He did not succumb them, so they never were, since the battle they had with Ben-Hadad and Ahab and Jehoshaphat, they never once again were at peace with Judah. That didn't happen. And Jehoram didn't make it any better by killing and smiting the Edomites from the chariots and the captains. It didn't matter because in verse 22 of 2 Kings 8, Edom still revolted. Which, by the way, as we know, Edom is the place down in Petra. If I can't even on the board, I got to show it again, different again, to remind you. Where is it at? It's not on that one. It's on this one, right here. So there's Edom and there's Petra, which is where the 144,000 group of Jews, there's 144,000 group of Jews. There's another 144,000 group of Semitic people, which are people in Christ, different group that goes through whole tribulation, fighting and proclaiming. They can't be killed. But then people, the first group of 144,000, 12,000 from each tribe, they leave, they cross over, they make their trek down. Ammon, Moab, and Edom, as it says in Daniel 11. He has no jurisdiction. The beast, as he is on the black horse, he has no jurisdiction over them. As he is the lawless one, he's going to trash them down here, track them down. He's going to flood the river Arnon. As they get down to here, this whole Petra, this whole Edom, and Petra is the rock city we know. So Edom revolting against and still surviving speaks to the fact that Jehoram and this evil, you can do all evil you want against Edom. They're going to still have a remnant that survives. Speaking to, there's still going to be many killed here and over their trek, but there'll still be a remnant that will survive. There just will. You can hate them all you want and want to kill. There's not going to be a death to all Jews, even though there will be, we talked about, was it 14 million that number was? 14 million, I think it was. And you're down to 144,000. That's a lot of dead people. That's a lot. And if they're not going to be killed in the persecution of this pursuit, then the majority of them will, with maybe a few left to try to survive. That's horrific either way you look at it. So going back to verse 22 in 2 Kings chapter 8, that he says, and the hand of Judah, they revolted against his hand. Then Libnah revolted at the same time, and the rest of the acts of Joram and all he did, they are not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah. And Joram slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David. And Ahaziah, his son, reigned in his stead. Ahaziah reigned for 1 year, just so you know. And here's Joram. That's his whole, that's it. So Jehoram, he reigns under Jehoshaphat for 7 years. His whole pedigree was, okay, I did evil. I married Ahab's daughter, and I fought against Edom, and I beat them, and they pushed me back, and then they won, and then I pursued against other people, and I ended up dying, and now I'm dead. Well, that's kind of a bad, there's no his whole legacy is kind of weak, very weak. Not to mention it starts with the bad premise of marrying Ahab's daughter. Yes?
Okay, two questions. First, Laney said is Zaire, Z-A-I-R, same
Yeah.
as Z-O-A-R. I looked that up,
Yeah.
but it isn't really clear.
Yeah, Zor, yeah, people, yeah. So Zaire and Zor, people do associate as the same. Thank you for bringing that up. They associate Zaire and Zor as the same in this region. And that's why when you look over further, if I have it on here, it's not even on here. Because again, it cuts it off again. I gotta get them. This is kind of odd, me going back to this map, even though it's the Exodus route. By the way, notice, I always think it's funny, the Exodus route, they don't show them crossing the Red Sea. You notice that? They always show them doing this. There's never a red line over the Red Sea. In every Bible commentary, they always do that. And I'm like, why are you guys doing that? Show them going over. So, anyway, but yeah, they say Zor and Zaire is the same. You're right, I look it up too, and you can't really find a reconciliation to the two, but that's a question mark. If you look among different geography piece of it, people think it's either the same, which is down here, or it's just close by in proximity. Because remember, that's where Lot went in the land of Zor, remember? Yes?
Yeah, the other Jehoram gets killed by Jehu. He has a worse exit than the
Correct.
Judah Jehoram.
Correct. Well, but that is different because the people of Israel were supposed to be all evil kings kind of thing. They were all evil, all 20 of them. Whereas the one in the south, I mean, you had a good shot. I mean, there's 10 that were good. So for Jehoram to come from a good dad and to have that, it's just ignorant. He's known as the guy who just married the king that God said did more evil than all of the kings before or after him. He married his daughter. Doesn't start off well for you. How would you expect your reign to go when that's your co-regent with you? This kind of speaks to, no offense, people's sense of saying, oh, it doesn't really matter who you marry as long as you're strong in your faith. Oh, it doesn't, huh? Okay. It seemed to matter a lot. I think that no offense to, I'm not saying that it's the woman's fault. I'm saying it's the person's fault who's filled with this evil. It happened to be the wife. She was the one who actually polluted his mind. Because how else do you explain the gravity of how he did evil in the eyes of the Lord to this gravity that God just wipes him off? It isn't just himself being disposed. It's because he had another push over the cliff by this woman who was not from good mom and dad. We already know his mom and dad are not, her mom and dad are not good.
But you know, to this Judah Jehoram's, well, not to say to his benefit, but I mean, she was brought into his line of view. But Samson went.
Correct. He went to Philistines.
Yeah, I mean, he went there.
He went there.
You know, it's not like Delilah was put in front of him. He went down there. I mean, so Samson really was worse than this Judah Jehoram, if you ask me.
No, and you see well, yeah. Yes, sorry, online. Yes, babe.
Vicky said, I have a note that says Edom did not have a king because the king of Moab, Misha, killed him. Is that right? At the time of the revolt, they didn't have a king?
Correct. And then they appointed a king, and they didn't have a king after he was killed. Remember, his successor was killed. And then here that says they appointed a king in verse 20 of 2 Kings chapter 8. So they had a king over them. They revolted from the hand of Judah. So they were under the Judah for a while because of the fact they were okay with the rule of Jehoshaphat. When Jehoram took over, they're like, no. I'm not going to go into that. So that shows you his character, that they wanted out. And that's why Libnah, by the way, who's amongst Judah, his outskirts puppet regime over here revolted. So how much more would a city amongst Judah revolt? Of course, because that just speaks to the king's character. They didn't like him at all. Yes.
And Lenny said a lot found out with his daughters.
Yeah.
Vicky said, and the study notes in my Bible says Athaliah was the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. And then in verse 2 Kings 8:26 it says that same person was the granddaughter of Omri, the king of Israel. Is so confusing.
You're coming up right now. So okay, we're getting there. It's not that confusing when you just follow you're right. You're a couple verses ahead of us. So now 2 Kings chapter 8 verse 25. So again, Jehoram of Israel's not dead yet. Jehoram of Judah is dead. So Jehoram, who married Ahab's Ahab's daughter, is dead. So Ahab's daughter, who married Jehoram, king of Judah, that king is dead. So then in verse 25, the 12th year of Jehoram, the son of Ahab, the king, this is the other Jehoram who's still alive, did Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram, king of Judah, begin to reign. So now you have, so now it's different. Okay, so now you have, to follow the bouncing ball here, so Jehoram, king of Judah, marries the daughter of Ahab. King of Israel, Jehoram, has now, he's still evil, he's still alive, but you got his sister, so Ahaziah ends up marrying, so he's the son of Jehoram, the king of oh, wait, I can see myself. Okay, so Ahaziah is the son of Jehoram, king of Judah, and he began to reign in Judah at 22 years old. And then it says here, when Ahaziah, which is Judah, king of Jehoram's son, he reigned for 1 year in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Athaliah. So that's Ahab's daughter whom Jehoram married. That's his mama. She's the daughter of Omri of Israel, who walked in the way. So it's interesting when it says Omri, and yet Omri was the one earlier on, was the one who reigned before Ahab. So you have, okay, so in the house of Ahab did evil in the sight of the Lord, as did the house of Ahab, for he was the son-in-law of the house of Ahab. Because obviously when Jehoram, the king of Judah, marries Ahab's daughter, that makes him the son-in-law, right? So in verse 28 it says, and he went with Joram, which is Ahaziah, the son of Ahab, to war against Ahazel. So wait. So Ahaziah, who's the son of Jehoram, now goes to Jehoram, the king of Israel, right? The king of Israel, Jehoram. Ahaziah is the son of the king of Judah, Jehoram. So he goes king of Israel, Jehoram, which makes that, remember, that makes that his uncle. Remember that? Because his dad was Jehoram, king of Judah, who married the sister of Jehoram, the king of Israel. So the king of Judah, Jehoram, dies. The wife is still alive, his mom. So then Ahaziah is now going to meet with Jehoram, king of Israel, to fight Hazael. That's his uncle, because he's the son of his sister, which makes him the uncle and nephew relationship. So that's what that is. So he goes into this situation in verse 28. King of Israel, he fights him. They go war against him at Ramoth Gilead, and the Syrians wounded Jehoram, and King Jehoram went back to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds which the Syrians had given him at Ramah when he fought against Ahazel, king of Syria. And Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram, king of Judah, went down to see Jehoram, the son of Ahab, who was in Jezreel because he was sick. So you see he went down there because that's his uncle. So I can draw this on the board. Yes?
Vicki said, so there is a lot of cross-family relations here.
Yes. Yes. So bottom line is this. So you have the kings. You have the kings of Israel and kings of Judah. Intermarried and intertwined. The intertwined, you got since the days of Ahab. So this, who is king of Israel. So what you have is simply, just remember what this is talking about to us. So people who always they always tell me this all the time. Well, I'm going to marry this person because they're nice, because they're kind, because they're loving, because they're this. Are they or are they not a godly person? And if they're not, then you're intermarrying. You're intermingling with another family that its tentacles will affect yours. And it's not going to be a positive thing. It's just not. You can say what you want to say. It's not going to happen. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. Make up all the excuses you want. I don't care what you say. The truth speaks louder than words. So you say what you want. But people want, well, I love this person. Ask yourself why. Ask yourself why. Because that's not healthy. I'm just telling you. Yes?
Two things. Tracy, first of all, said laugh out loud, nothing new under the sun, just like today.
Oh,
Heidi
gosh.
said, but they will change, laugh out loud.
Yeah, they will change, yeah. That's right. They'll say they'll change. I'll marry them and they'll change. And so here you have under Ahab. So understand Ahab's evil influence. Remember later on when Jehu was going to kill Jehoram, and then he's going to kill Ahaziah, and he's going to take out Jezebel. He mentions Naboth because he knows that Jezebel's the one who took out Naboth, and Ahab did nothing about it. He said nothing about it. And yet people want to act like that's just, who cares? No. He may not have killed him directly, but he was the king, and that makes his wife the queen, and that means that she has no reason. She forged his signature, if you remember, to take his land and kill him. And Ahab said nothing about it except for benefit from the proceeds of her evil deeds. So that's a lesson to be learned. You cannot benefit. Someone would say things to me like, what's the principles of the Bible in everyday life? Okay, when you benefit from someone else's evil deeds and use the excuse, it wasn't my evil deed that did it. It doesn't matter. If you know it's an evil deed and you benefited from it, then to you it's also imputed as evil. It's that simple. You go, no, it's not that simple. Sure it is. That's what happened with Ahab. That's what God said to him. He said that you killed Naboth. He goes, I didn't kill him. Yeah, right. Like you didn't know what happened, and you did nothing about it. You didn't lament a bit. You went right into the benefit of taking the vineyard that you argued before with him about. And as Ahab we'd be thinking, yeah, but I offered him a good deal, which he did. It's my wife who said I was not, I was too weak in the knees, and she went to go and do the edict and forge my name. Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You still knew he was dead unjustly, and you did nothing. And you have an accountability and a culpability of your position. You could have made a world of difference. You could have done all kinds of right by that. You could have maybe not punished your wife. You want to go that way? Fine. You could have at least made right by his death. You could have not taken his land, given it to his family, his kindred. But no, he took it like it was happy times. So, and that's one of the biggest things. You see Ahab was one who he not only married into evil with Jezebel, who was a hybrid offspring, by the way, which, by the way, people say that Libnah was a founded city of Canaanites, which if that's true, because we don't know where it really was, so there's a question mark on the map. Because if it's a founded city of Canaanites, that means it had some hybrid offspring in there, some giants, some angelic hybrid offsprings. That's not good. Then you have Jezebel, that's where she came from, because she's from the Phoenician people who had that hybrid offspring of Canaanites, and she's a worshiper of Baal, and they had married her, and then their marriage led to him being a puppet of her, who was the real one who's ruling Israel behind his position. She was the one making all the calls. Kill this person, do this, worship this, the false gods. And he was just kowtowing her. And all because, look at what he did. He caused Israel to sin in a way that started with an intermarriage and intertwining with two different people that should never have been together. And you say, well, that shouldn't have happened. Well, you can't undo it. No, I understand that. But just buckle up, Buttercup, because there goes your ride of your life. You think it's funny. You think it's funny when kids and grandkids get affected for life because of divorce, because of all the anger and hatred and malice. Look yourself in the mirror. Look yourself in the mirror. You're the one who did it. You did it. Stop lying to yourself. Oh, it's not. Yes, it is your fault. Yes, it is your fault. You did it. You shouldn't be doing this stuff. But people, I can't tell you how many times in a counseling session that it happens to me. And I'm thinking about Elisha looking at Hazael and going, he's thinking about all this stuff. He's thinking about, if Ahab didn't marry this gal, and then that's going to tentacle into his kids being evil, and then his kids affecting the kings of Judah's kids, who then they become evil. Oh my God. And then the carnage you're going to do to our own people. They already ate each other, for crying out loud. Now you're going to go and kill them as well. All this is going through his head. You got murder and all this. I can't even. It's hard to even fathom how Elisha could just contain himself. I would just went ballistic myself, but he just contains himself in the best way he can when he was staring at Hazael. But now you get more gravity as to, imagine you. Everybody knows that, not to get morbid here, I'm not trying to be pointing fingers at somebody, but everybody knows somebody that had a marriage go bad, right? That has a family kind of go south, dysfunctional. Just imagine that God gave you privy to see in all the tentacles of all the pain and heartache that it caused to them, their kids, and their grandkids, all before it happened. How do you embody that in your emotions and in your mind and your spirit? That's what Elijah was having to do. That's why you stare at him like, you don't even know. You don't even know the gravity of the tentacles of hate and evil and carnage and dysfunction and brokenness you're causing to humans and to the Spirit of God. More important, it's unfathomable.
Well,
you don't even know.
They're federal heads. That's the big problem.
What's that?
They're federal heads for their nation.
It just doesn't, and it really speaks to how in our understanding of what we have today, this, don't forget, this is, ironically, remember, this is about tribulation, typology. So how does this intermarriage and intermingling tie into tribulation? You go, well, wait a minute. Remember what it said in Matthew 13? We haven't looked at this in a while, but remember what it said in Matthew 13 about the darnel and the wheat? Remember what it says? And it says very carefully in Matthew 13, when he says in verse 25, but while the men slept, his enemy came and sowed darnel. The enemy man came while men slept. We have to be vigilant. We have to be watchful. It's when we fall off our vigilant, watchful, God-given responsibilities that we allow evil to come in. And that's what happened to Ahab. He was already like that. He let it come in. And what does that mean? Jehoshaphat did that. He let it come in to his son, Jehoram. And then what happens? The darnel, as we know, it says in my dialogue here, it says here that them both grow together in verse 30 to the time of the harvest, because they're going to bring them in for bundles. They're going to bind them for bundles to be burned. And it's just, you can't separate them, because why? And look at the latter part. People always want to make that into the Catholic Church. No, because the darnel is not the Catholic Church. It's people that are actually they're the offspring of the intermingling of Gentile people with Jewish people, the 144,000 remnant. They try to marry into them so they can have a stronghold on inheriting through physical strength, which, by the way, just for example, let me go back to Matthew chapter 5, when Jesus says,